All your life you've done nothing but live off this family." Father's voice sliced through the National Day banquet like a blade through silk, his words echoing off the marble columns of our Georgetown estate where senators and Supreme Court justices had dined for 50 years. Laughter ricocheted around me, my brother-in-law Henry's cruel chuckle, relatives clinking crystal glasses, 200 of Washington's elite shifting uncomfortably as they witnessed a public execution disguised as family dinner conversation. My hands pressed against the mahogany table, fingers hiding the envelope I'd carried for months, warm with documents that would rewrite everything these people thought they knew about power in America. They thought this National Day celebration would be another performance of their political dynasty, another night of treating me like the family disappointment who'd never amounted to anything. But in 15 minutes, when that door opened and my real life walked in, their laughter would die so fast you could hear their careers suffocating. My name is Amelia Chen. I'm 39 years old. And in this family, this dynasty of politicians and power brokers who've shaped American foreign policy for 3 generations, that has always meant I was nothing. Less than nothing, actually. I was the genetic disappointment, the daughter who should have been grateful for the privilege of sharing the Chen bloodline and keeping her mouth shut about everything that actually mattered in Washington. The National Day banquet was unfolding in our family's Georgetown mansion, a fortress of marble and mahogany that had hosted 3 presidents, countless senators, and more Supreme Court justices than most people meet in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across oil paintings of dead Chens who stared down with the disapproval of men who'd built political empires and expected their descendants to maintain them. Tonight, the Great Hall buzzed with 200 of Washington's most dangerous people, the ones who decided which countries got invaded, which trade deals got signed, which Supreme Court nominees got confirmed. All gathered to celebrate America while secretly calculating who owed favors to whom and which political alliances might prove most profitable. Father commanded the head table like a general surveying conquered territory. Richard Chen, 6'3", silver hair that had gone gray during 8 years as Secretary of State, eyes that calculated human worth in electoral votes and campaign contributions. At 72, he still radiated the kind of authority that made foreign ambassadors sweat and made senators return his calls within the hour. When he spoke, it sounded like foreign policy being carved in stone. My brother-in-law Henry occupied the seat to Father's right with the casual arrogance of someone who'd married into power and assumed it made him untouchable. 36 years old, Harvard Law followed by a Rhodes Scholarship, teeth so white they could blind satellites. He'd charmed my sister Catherine into marriage 6 years ago, then spent their entire relationship using our family name to climb from junior staffer to Deputy Secretary of Defense. His smile was sharp enough to cut throats, which he did regularly in Senate hearings disguised as diplomatic negotiations. Mother sat beside Father like a museum piece, her silence polished to perfection after 41 years of marriage to a man who measured his wife's worth in how well she complimented his public image. Margaret Chen had learned early that opinions were luxuries she couldn't afford in a family where every dinner conversation might end up in the Washington Post. So she'd traded her voice for security and spent 4 decades perfecting the art of looking elegant while saying absolutely nothing that mattered. The extended family filled the remaining seats like a Supreme Court of cruelty. Uncle Thomas and his wife Patricia, both federal judges who'd spent 20 years deciding which constitutional rights were worth protecting, cousin James, currently serving as U.S. ambassador to Germany, his diplomatic immunity extending to basic human decency. Aunt Dorothy, whose nonprofit work was really just tax-deductible networking with the wives of defense contractors. All of them bound together by Chen blood and Chen influence, secure in their knowledge that they belonged at tables where the future of American power got decided over wine that cost more than most people's cars. I sat at the far end, naturally. Not because there wasn't room closer to the center of power, but because proximity to the family's golden children might contaminate their reputations with whatever genetic deficiency had made me unsuitable for public service. The contrast was surgical in its precision. Them in their designer armor, custom gowns and suits that whispered political dynasty to anyone who recognized the tailoring. Me, in a simple navy dress that looked professional, but didn't scream federal budget or classified. Clearance. But what burned in my chest like acid was the memory reel that played every time we gathered like this. A lifetime of moments when I'd been dismissed, diminished, erased from conversations about the very government I'd been serving in ways they'd never bothered to notice. At 14, I'd asked why we supported dictatorships that tortured their own citizens as long as they were strategically aligned with American interests. Father's response: "Foreign policy is complicated, sweetheart, not suitable for emotional thinking." At 22, fresh out of Georgetown with a degree in international relations, I'd suggested our family's think tank could have more impact if we focused on human rights instead of just military contracts. "You'll understand when you gain some real-world experience. Idealism is a luxury we can't afford." At 28, with a master's from Harvard Kennedy School, I'd proposed joining Father's consulting firm that advised Fortune 500 companies on navigating federal regulations. Consulting requires a certain temperament, Amelia. Maybe something in academia would suit you better. Each rejection had been wrapped in condescending protection, each dismissal delivered with the kind of smile that suggested they were saving me from realities I was too delicate to comprehend. But what they'd never understood was that rejection had taught me patience, observation, and strategy. While they'd been performing their importance for CNN cameras and Foreign Affairs magazine, I'd been learning how American power actually worked, not from the spotlight where they postured, but from the classified briefing rooms where the real decisions got made. I'd learned that absence didn't protect you from their casual cruelty. But presence, the right kind of presence, with the right security clearance, at the right moment, could silence every sneer they'd ever aimed at your dignity. The envelope pressed against my thigh felt warm through the fabric of my dress, heated by anticipation that had been building for 18 months. Inside were documents that would rewrite every assumption this family had ever made about who deserved to sit where at tables like this. But I wasn't ready yet, not quite. I needed their arrogance to reach heights that would make their fall more devastating. Needed their casual cruelty to be witnessed by 200 people who controlled American foreign policy. So I sat there in my designated seat at the margins of my own family's power, watching Father hold court about America's role in the world while treating his own daughter like she was too insignificant to have opinions about the country she'd spent the last 15 years defending in ways that would make their diplomatic achievements look like high school debate club. They thought tonight was about celebrating American power. They had no idea it was about to become the night they learned exactly who wielded it. The National Day banquet unfolded like a carefully choreographed performance of American power. Velvet drapes in deep burgundy framed floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Potomac, while crystal chandeliers cast light that danced like tiny stars across marble floors polished to mirror perfection. The sound of designer heels clicking against stone echoed through the great hall like a countdown to something inevitable. The dining table stretched nearly 30 feet, set with china that had served presidents and foreign ministers, each place setting worth more than most Americans made in a month. The air hung thick with expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and the particular tension that comes when people who control nuclear weapons gather to celebrate their own importance. But beneath all that elegance was something uglier, the predatory anticipation of a family that had turned cruelty into an art form. Father rose from his seat with the theatrical timing of someone accustomed to commanding attention from rooms full of world leaders. His crystal glass caught the chandelier light as he lifted it, 72 years of accumulated authority radiating from his presence like heat from a furnace. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed across the dining hall with the practiced projection of someone who delivered speeches to the United Nations. "Tonight we celebrate not just America's independence, but the Chen family's continued service to this great nation." Applause rippled through 200 guests who understood that clapping wasn't just polite, it was politically necessary. Senators, ambassadors, defense contractors, Supreme Court spouses, all of them dependent on Chen family approval for their continued relevance in Washington's ecosystem. Henry's chuckle rose above the applause like smoke from a fire just getting started. "Richard, you've built something truly extraordinary. A legacy of public service that spans generations, a family that understands what real sacrifice means." His eyes swept the table, landing on me with the precision of a sniper taking aim. Of course, not everyone at this table has contributed equally to that legacy. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations stuttered to a halt as 200 pairs of eyes swiveled toward the far end of the table where I sat in my simple navy dress, suddenly feeling like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was attending. "You'll never matter here, Amelia. Aunt Dorothy's voice carried that particular poison that only comes from women who've married into power and forgotten what it felt like to earn respect. This table is for people who've actually shaped history, not watched it from the sidelines. Uncle Thomas nodded with the sagely approval of someone delivering a Supreme Court verdict. Some people are born to lead, others are born to. Well, be grateful for proximity to greatness. Why are you even at this table? Cousin James asked, his diplomatic immunity extending to basic human decency. I mean, seriously. What have you contributed to this family besides existing? Each word landed like a physical blow, precision strikes designed to remind me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of a family that had forgotten I was human. My heart hammered against my ribs, each pulse daring me to react, to defend myself, to prove that 39 years of existence had amounted to something more than occupying space at gatherings where my betters discussed important things. But I'd learned patience in rooms these people would never see, in briefings they'd never be cleared to attend, in moments when the wrong word could start wars or end them. We are the real pillars of this family, Father continued, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering historical truth. The ones who've sacrificed personal comfort for public service, who've put America's interests above our own convenience. The irony was breathtaking. These people who'd spent decades using government positions to enrich themselves and their friends were lecturing me about sacrifice and service. Henry raised his glass in a toast that felt like a funeral oration for my dignity. To the Chen family legacy, built by people who understand that power isn't given, it's earned through dedication, intelligence, and the courage to make difficult decisions. 200 glasses lifted in unison, crystal catching candlelight like stars aligned for my execution. The sound of applause filled that marble hall like thunder, celebrating achievements they'd inherited rather than earned. I noticed a single wine glass wobbling on the table's edge, catching reflections of their smug faces in its curved surface. Such a small thing, a glass balanced precariously, ready to fall at the slightest disturbance. Like their assumptions about who held the real power in this room. The envelope pressed against my thigh felt warm now, heated by anticipation that had been building for 18 months of careful planning, strategic positioning, and documentation that would rewrite American foreign policy textbooks. Some people spend their lives dreaming of relevance, Father continued, his steel-gray eyes finding mine across that 30-foot expanse of mahogany and crystal. Others achieve it through hard work, sacrifice, and proving they deserve a seat at tables where history gets written. The message was clear. I was the dreamer, they were the achievers. I was the disappointment, they were the dynasty. I was the mistake, they were the legacy. But in 15 minutes, when those doors opened and my real life walked in, that wobbling wine glass was going to shatter against marble floors, and their assumptions were going to shatter right along with it. Because while they'd been performing their importance for cameras and voters, I'd been earning mine in ways that would make their diplomatic achievements look like high school model UN. The countdown had begun, and they had no idea what was coming. The laughter was still echoing off those marble columns when the mahogany doors at the far end of the great hall swung open with the authority of someone who didn't need permission to interrupt conversations about American power. Every head in that room turned toward the sound, senators mid-sentence, ambassadors pausing with crystal glasses halfway to their lips, Supreme Court spouses freezing like deer caught in headlights. The kind of collective attention that only happens when someone important enough to change the trajectory of careers walks into a room unannounced. Secretary of State William Harrison stepped through those doors like he was walking into the Situation Room during a national crisis. 6'1", silver hair that had gone gray during 4 years of managing America's relationships with hostile nations, wearing the kind of charcoal suit that whispered classified briefings and Oval Office meetings. Behind him came 2 men I recognized but hadn't expected to see tonight. Director James Mitchell from the CIA, and General Patricia Hawkins, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The kind of people who only appeared together when something was about to shift the balance of global power. The room went silent with the particular quiet that comes when everyone present realizes they're about to witness something that will be discussed in Washington for years to come. Harrison's eyes swept the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent decades reading diplomatic situations, cataloging faces, calculating who needed to know what and when. His gaze found me at the far end of that 30-foot table, and something shifted in his expression, respect mixed with something that looked dangerously like anticipation. He walked across that marble floor with the measured pace of someone delivering news that would rewrite history books, his footsteps echoing through a silence so complete you could hear hearts beating from across the room. 200 of Washington's most powerful people watched as the Secretary of State extended his hand toward the family disappointment, sitting in her simple navy dress at the margins of her own dynasty. "Congratulations," Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of presidential authority across that crystal-laden dining hall, "to our newly appointed Minister of International Security." The words detonated like a nuclear weapon in that marble mausoleum. Time seemed to slow down into cinematic frames, each moment stretched into crystalline clarity that would be burned into everyone's memory forever. The wine glass that had been wobbling on the table's edge slipped from Uncle Thomas's nerveless fingers, shattering against marble with the sound of everything they thought they knew about power exploding into irreparable fragments. Father's laughter died mid-breath, the sound cutting off so abruptly it left echoes hanging in suddenly still air. His steel-gray eyes widened with the shock of someone watching his entire worldview collapse in real time. Henry's smug smile didn't just falter. It disintegrated like paper in fire, his perfect teeth suddenly looking less like weapons and more like tombstones marking the death of his assumed superiority. Aunt Dorothy's mouth fell open in a perfect O of disbelief, her jewelry catching chandelier light as her hands trembled with the realization that she'd just insulted someone who now outranked every person in that room. Cousin James, ambassador to Germany, diplomatic immunity and all, went pale as old bone, understanding immediately that his carefully cultivated career had just become dependent on the goodwill of the woman he'd been mocking 5 minutes earlier. 200 guests sat frozen in various stages of shock and recognition, crystal glasses suspended in midair, conversations dying like engines that had just run out of fuel, the kind of silence that comes when everyone present realizes they've just witnessed a changing of the guard that will reshape American foreign policy. For decades they'd judged me by wealth they thought I lacked, by connections they assumed I didn't have, by achievements they'd decided I'd never accomplish. But power, real power, the kind that moves nations and topples governments, doesn't announce itself with designer labels or country club memberships. It moves in shadows, in classified briefings, in rooms where decisions get made about which democracies survive and which dictatorships fall. While they'd been performing their importance for CNN cameras, I'd been earning mine in the Pentagon, the CIA, the National Security Council, places where America's real strength gets forged by people who understand that ideology without capability is just expensive noise. The envelope pressed against my thigh suddenly felt light as air, no longer weighed down by secrets but lifted by validation that had been 18 months in the making. Inside those documents weren't just my appointment papers. They were security clearances that would make their diplomatic achievements look like high school debate club, authorization codes that could rewrite the global balance of power, access to intelligence briefings that would curl their hair if they knew what American foreign policy actually required. Harrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to the kind of quiet that makes everyone else lean forward to catch words that might reshape their understanding of how the world actually works. "The President sends her personal congratulations," he continued, and I watched my family's faces drain of whatever color had survived the initial shock. "Your work in counterterrorism operations has been exemplary. The intelligence you developed in Damascus, the networks you dismantled in Islamabad, the assassination attempt you prevented in Berlin, the President wanted you to know that your service hasn't gone unnoticed." Damascus, Islamabad, Berlin, 3 cities where I'd spent the last 15 years preventing wars while my family had been hosting dinner parties, dismantling terrorist networks while they'd been playing political games, saving American lives while they'd been calculating stock portfolios and campaign contributions. The room wasn't just silent anymore. It was suffocating under the weight of revelations that rewrote every assumption they'd ever made about who deserved power and who had actually been wielding it. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against marble with the sound of someone finally claiming her rightful place in the world. And for the first time in 39 years, my family was looking at me with something approaching awe. The silence stretched like a tightrope over an abyss, ready to snap under the weight of 39 years of assumptions colliding with reality that refused to be dismissed or explained away. Father was the first to break, his voice cracking like old leather under pressure. This can't be true. His steel-gray eyes darted between Harrison and me like he was watching a tennis match played with nuclear weapons. It's impossible. There's been some mistake, some confusion about. There's no mistake, Harrison interrupted with the kind of quiet authority that had ended wars and toppled governments. Minister Chen has been serving her country with distinction for 15 years. The appointment was unanimous among the National Security Council. Father's jaw tightened until tendons stood out like guitar strings about to snap. 72 years of being the most important person in every room he entered, and suddenly he was looking at his own daughter like she was speaking a foreign language he'd never learned. I reached into the envelope I'd been carrying and pulled out documents that rustled like autumn leaves, each page a silent strike against decades of arrogance disguised as family concern. "Check the official State Department announcement," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority I'd learned in Situation Room briefings where the wrong word could start World War I too. "It went live at 6:15 this evening, 45 minutes ago. My name is on record, my security clearance, my operational history." The papers I spread across that mahogany table weren't just appointment letters. They were presidential commendations, classified mission reports with sections blacked out for national security, awards for services that couldn't be named in public, because acknowledging them would compromise ongoing operations. Each document was proof of decades of strategy, preparation, and relentless effort that had been invisible to a family who'd never bothered to look beyond their own reflections. Henry's eyes darted nervously between the documents and my face, his diplomatic training finally kicking in as he calculated exactly how badly he'd miscalculated the power dynamics in this room. "Amelia, we had no idea that you were." "That I was what?" I cut him off with surgical precision. "That I was serving my country while you were serving yourselves? That I was preventing terrorist attacks while you were playing political games? That I was earning the respect of presidents while you were trading on a family name you'd never done anything to deserve?" The documents kept coming. Operation reports from Damascus, where I'd spent 18 months infiltrating a network planning attacks on American embassies. Intelligence assessments from Islamabad, where I'd identified and eliminated a cell plotting to assassinate the Pakistani Prime Minister. After-action reports from Berlin, where I'd prevented what would have been the largest terrorist attack in European history since 9/11. Uncle Thomas picked up one of the reports, his federal judge hands trembling as he read classifications that were higher than his security clearance. "These operations, the dates. You were supposed to be working at that nonprofit in Boston." "The nonprofit was cover," I said simply. "Deep cover for operations that required someone with my particular skill set and family connections. Someone who could move through diplomatic circles without raising suspicion. Someone whose own family would never think to ask too many questions about why she traveled so much." Aunt Dorothy's jewelry clinked nervously as her hands shook. "You mean, all those years when we thought you were just drifting?" "I was saving American lives. I finished for her. While you were hosting charity galas, I was dismantling terrorist networks. While you were attending state dinners, I was preventing wars. While you were collecting art and vacation homes, I was collecting intelligence that kept this country safe." The room had gone beyond silent. It was suffocating under the weight of revelations that rewrote not just family history, but their understanding of how American power actually worked. Cousin James, ambassador to Germany, was staring at one of the Berlin reports with the expression of someone who'd just realized he'd been living in a universe he didn't understand. "The attack on the Christmas markets, the intelligence that prevented it, that was you?" "Among other things." Father's voice, when it finally came, sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think? That I was a disappointment? That I'd never amounted to anything? That I was living off family money instead of earning my own way?" The questions hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had just fired. "Because classified operations require classified lives, Dad. Because the best cover is the one nobody thinks to question. Because a family that never respected me enough to ask real questions about my work was perfect camouflage for someone who needed to be invisible." Harrison stepped forward, his presence commanding attention from 200 guests, who were still processing the fact that the family disappointment had just revealed herself to be one of the most powerful people in American intelligence. "The president wanted me to personally deliver this," he said, pulling an official document from his jacket. "In recognition of your service to the nation, and in anticipation of the challenges facing your new position." The Presidential Medal of Freedom caught the chandelier light as he placed it on the table next to my other documents. "The highest civilian honor in America, awarded for services that would never be fully disclosed to the public but had quite literally saved thousands of lives. Father stared at that medal like it was an alien artifact from a civilization he didn't recognize. Henry's mouth opened and closed without sound. The extended family sat frozen in their chairs, finally understanding that the hierarchy they'd spent decades enforcing had just been completely inverted. They thought I had only inherited their scorn, their dismissal, their casual cruelty disguised as family concern. But I'd inherited something far more valuable, the world they'd never imagined I could claim. Not through politics or connections or inherited influence, but through competence, sacrifice, and a willingness to serve something larger than my own comfort. The laughter that had echoed through this room 20 minutes ago seemed like it had happened in another lifetime, in a universe where their assumptions about power and worth still held any weight. 200 guests murmured among themselves, the sound like wind through leaves as Washington's power structure realigned itself around a new reality they were still struggling to comprehend. And for the first time in 39 years, when my family looked at me, they saw not the daughter who'd failed to meet their expectations. They saw the woman who'd exceeded every expectation that mattered. The woman who now outranked every single person in that room, including them. The great hall had transformed into something that felt more like a courtroom than a celebration. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was the weight of 200 powerful people recalculating everything they thought they knew about influence, authority, and who actually controlled the levers of American power. The echo of shattered crystal still hung in the air like a funeral bell, marking the death of assumptions that had governed this family for 3 generations. I stood at the far end of that 30-foot mahogany table, no longer the exile in my own bloodline, but the center of gravity around which everyone else's political careers would now orbit. The Presidential Medal of Freedom caught the chandelier light, casting tiny rainbows across documents that had rewritten the hierarchy of Washington's most influential family. Harrison stepped back with the practiced deference of someone who understood that power had just shifted in ways that would reshape American foreign policy for decades to come. Behind him, General Hawkins and Director Mitchell stood like honor guards flanking someone whose decisions could now start wars or prevent them. "The transition briefings begin Monday," Harrison said, his voice carrying across that marble hall with the weight of national security implications. "The president expects a full review of current operations by Wednesday. The Chinese delegation arrives Thursday, and they'll be expecting to negotiate with America's new Minister of International Security. The Chinese delegation. Nuclear treaties. Trade agreements worth trillions of dollars. Decisions that would affect the lives of billions of people. All of it now resting in the hands of the woman they'd been mocking 20 minutes ago." I looked around that dining hall at faces frozen in various stages of shock and recognition, at relatives who'd spent decades treating me like an expensive mistake, finally understanding that they'd been living in a reality they didn't comprehend. "Moving forward," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned in rooms where hesitation could cost lives, "things are going to change in this family." Father's steel-gray eyes met mine across that expanse of crystal and mahogany, and for the first time in 39 years, Richard Chen was looking at his daughter as someone whose opinion mattered more than his own. "The Chen family name is no longer just a legacy of inherited wealth and political connections," I continued, watching 200 guests hang on every word. "It's now attached to someone with direct responsibility for America's national security. That means accountability. That means integrity. That means understanding that our actions reflect not just on ourselves but on the country I've sworn to protect." The implications hung in the air like smoke from a gun that had just fired. Every family member present was calculating how their behavior, their business dealings, their casual corruption would now be scrutinized by intelligence agencies that reported directly to me. "Dad," I said, my voice carrying across that marble hall with the finality of someone delivering a verdict that couldn't be appealed, "your consulting firm's contracts with defense contractors are going to be reviewed by the Department of Justice. Every deal, every favor, every arrangement that might constitute a conflict of interest with my position." His jaw tightened until tendons stood out like cables under strain. 72 years of building an empire through influence and access, and now his own daughter was holding the power to audit every foundation stone. "Henry," I turned toward my brother-in-law, watching his diplomatic smile crumble like cheap plaster, "your position as Deputy Secretary of Defense is going to require Senate confirmation hearings. Again." This time with full disclosure of your financial ties to weapons manufacturers and private military contractors. Henry's eyes darted nervously toward Catherine, toward father, toward anyone who might rescue him from the accountability he'd spent 6 years avoiding through family connections and careful omissions on ethics forms. Uncle Thomas, Aunt Dorothy, Cousin James, I continued, my voice steady as granite as I addressed federal judges and diplomats who'd assumed their positions were untouchable. Your financial disclosures are going to be reviewed by ethics committees that now report to someone who knows exactly which laws you've been bending and which favors you've been trading. The silence that followed wasn't just shock. It was the sound of people who'd built careers on avoiding oversight suddenly realizing they were about to face the most thorough investigation of their lives. But it was the pin on my lapel that made the transformation complete. Harrison had attached it while announcing my appointment, a small gold eagle clutching arrows and an olive branch, the official insignia of the Minister of International Security. Under the chandelier light, it caught reflections like a star being born, a mark of recognition that had been earned through sacrifice they'd never comprehended. For 39 years, I said, my voice carrying the weight of every insult, every dismissal, every moment they'd made me feel invisible in my own family, you've treated me like a burden, a disappointment, someone who'd never amount to anything worth acknowledging. 200 guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, witnessing a reckoning that would be discussed in Washington for decades to come. But power isn't inherited, I continued, touching that pin with fingers that had diffused bombs in Damascus, decoded intelligence in Islamabad, prevented massacres in Berlin. It's earned through service, sacrifice, and a willingness to put something larger than yourself above your own comfort. The contrast was surgical in its precision. Them with their inherited titles and appointed positions, me with authority earned through 15 years of bleeding for a country that had never known my name until tonight. The family name you've been trading on for 3 generations now belongs to someone who's actually served it, I said, watching their world reshape itself around a new reality they were still struggling to accept. Someone whose decisions will be scrutinized by history instead of hidden behind classified briefings. Father's voice, when it finally came, sounded like a man who'd just watched his empire change ownership. Amelia, what happens now? I looked at this family that had shaped every insecurity I'd ever carried, that had taught me to doubt my worth while I was saving their country, that had dismissed my contributions while benefiting from the security I'd helped provide. Now you learn what it means to be related to someone who actually matters in Washington, I said simply, instead of someone who just pretends to. The pin on my lapel caught the light one more time, reflecting not just chandelier crystals but the inevitability of a truth that had been 39 years in the making. I wasn't their disappointment anymore. I was their reckoning. I gathered my documents with the precision of someone who had just won a 15-year war fought in the shadows. Presidential commendations, classified reports, the Medal of Freedom, every paper proof that the family disappointment had been America's secret weapon all along. The leather portfolio snapped shut, echoing through the marble hall like the final gavel of a trial that had lasted 39 years. The transition team will be in touch, I said, my voice carrying across the crystal-laden dining room with authority. Classified briefings begin Monday at 6 a.m. The Chinese delegation arrives Thursday, expecting to negotiate with someone who understands America's security is not a game. 200 of Washington's most powerful watched in silence as the Chen family hierarchy inverted itself in real time. Behind me, the family froze in shock, their assumptions about power shattered like that wine glass still glittering on the marble floor. The crisp October air hit me as I stepped out of the Georgetown mansion where I had spent 39 years doubting my worth. Washington stretched before me, city lights across the Potomac, the Capitol glowing, the Pentagon marking the building where I had spent countless nights preventing wars while my family slept in comfort paid for by favors and contracts. My heels clicked with confidence now, not hesitation. Encrypted messages buzzed, confirmations from agencies, briefings scheduled, the president sending personal congratulations. The machinery of American power was realigning, the family outcast now deciding military aid, intelligence operations, and diplomatic negotiations. I paused at my sedan among luxury cars flaunting inherited influence. Mine had carried someone who mattered, to CIA safe houses, Pentagon briefings, and diplomatic meetings where a single word could collapse alliances. It was unassuming, but it carried authority earned, not inherited. Looking back at the mansion, light spilling from red brick windows, I realized the power inside was different tonight, no longer inherited influence but earned authority. Father, calculating lost contracts and federal investigations. Henry, trying to survive confirmation hearings now tied to family conflicts. The extended family, wondering how their corruption would fare under my oversight. All my life, I had been underestimated, belittled, silenced. 39 years treated as an expensive mistake. Tonight, power had a new face. The family that had dismissed me finally understood who they had underestimated. The pin on my lapel caught the streetlight, a small gold eagle reflecting not just light but the inevitability of a truth kept secret for 15 years. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was the one who had achieved what truly mattered, protecting lives, preventing wars, heroism in the shadows where real security work happens. I drove away, leaving behind the mansion where I had learned to doubt myself, heading toward a future where my worth would be measured by the safety of millions who would never know my name but would sleep peacefully because of decisions I made in rooms they would never see. The banquet hall glowed softly in my rearview mirror, a world reshaped by truth and documentation, leaving only shattered pride and broken assumptions on marble floors. The family that had tried to define me by their limits learned that some definitions are temporary, but real power, earned through service and sacrifice, is permanent. Tonight, it finally had the right address. Amelia's story isn't just about political appointments or government service. It's about the moment you realize that real power doesn't come from inheritance, connections, or who you know at dinner parties. It comes from competence, sacrifice, and a willingness to serve something larger than your own comfort. If this story reminded you of your own family dynamics, if it made you think about someone whose contributions have gone unrecognized, hit that like button and subscribe. Turn on notifications because next week we're exploring another story about quiet strength and explosive revelations. Share this with someone who needs to remember that respect isn't inherited, it's earned through actions that matter when nobody's watching. Remember, the people who underestimate you today might need your protection tomorrow. Make sure you're strong enough to provide it, whether they deserve it or not. Until next time, keep serving something greater than yourself, even when the people closest to you can't see the value in what you do.